Have you ever met someone who doesn't break? Not someone who never falls. Someone who falls and gets back up before you've finished watching them fall, who faces failure the way most people face Tuesday morning, without drama, without negotiation. Just the next thing that happened, and now here's what comes after it. While everyone else is explaining why this time was different, why they'll try again when things settle, this person is already back at work. You know what people say about them. Lucky, naturally disciplined, born different. But what most people refuse to accept is that there's a price, a specific, unglamorous, daily price, and most people look at it and walk away. Here's what nobody tells you about consistency. It has nothing to do with motivation, nothing to do with discipline in the way people usually mean it, nothing to do with willpower. It has to do with one thing: what you do on the mornings when nothing is at stake. Not the mornings before a deadline, not the mornings when someone is watching, the ordinary mornings, the ones where the only thing requiring anything from you is your own word to yourself. Most people do different things on those mornings than they do on the important ones. That gap is the entire problem. There was a man in feudal Japan who closed it completely, not through motivation, not through some special quality he was born with. Through a practice so specific that before he died he wrote it down in 21 principles. The last principle is 4 words. Those 4 words will change how you see every ordinary morning for the rest of your life. Before I show you what they are, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment. Tell me one thing you keep starting and never finishing. I read every single comment. I genuinely want to know. Now, back to Japan, 1622, and to a young samurai named Riku, who had more talent than anyone in his dojo and almost nothing to show for it. Chapter 1. The Samurai Who Should Have Been Great. Ekizen Province, Japan, 1622. Riku was 23 years old and had been training since he was 9. 14 years, the same dojo, the same forms, the same master watching him every morning with an expression that never quite became pride. He was talented, everyone said so, not in the way people say things to be kind, in the way they say things when they mean it. His footwork was exceptional, his strikes were clean. His reading of an opponent's movement was among the best his master had ever seen in a student his age. Other students trained harder than Riku. None of them moved the way he did. And yet, in formal matches against students with less natural ability, Riku was inconsistent in a way that defied explanation. Some days he was untouchable, other days he lost to men he had beaten easily the week before. Not because his technique failed, his technique was fine. Because something underneath the technique was unstable. Something that didn't have a name but that his opponents could feel the moment they faced him. On the good days it wasn't there. On the bad days it was the first thing they found. His master, Hideo, had watched this pattern for years without fully naming it. Riku trained hard when he felt motivated, when a match was coming, when someone was watching, when there was something at stake visible enough to feel. Those mornings, he arrived early. He stayed late. The practice had a quality to it that made the other students stop and look. On ordinary mornings, when there was nothing immediate to prove, his practice was different, shorter, less focused. He went through the forms the way a man walks a familiar road while thinking about something else. The movements were technically correct, but the person doing them was somewhere else. He knew this about himself. That was the worst part. He could see it clearly from the outside, the way you can see a habit in yourself that you can't seem to stop. He understood the problem. He had no idea how to fix it. The match that broke something in him happened on an ordinary afternoon in late autumn. His opponent was a student named Kota, younger, less experienced. His technique had obvious gaps that Riku had identified and planned to exploit within the first exchange. None of it happened. By the end of the match, Riku had won nothing and understood less about why than he had at the beginning. He sat alone at the edge of the practice floor afterward, sword across his knees, watching the other students finish their own work. The autumn light was going. The dojo smelled of wood and sweat, and the specific quiet of a place where people come to be tested. Hideo sat beside him without speaking for a long time. A long time passed. "Tell me something," he finally said. "On the mornings when no match is scheduled, when nothing is being decided, how do you practice?" Riku looked at the practice floor. He didn't answer. "That is your answer," Hideo said. He stood up slowly, the way older men stand when they have been sitting on cold wood. "There is a man whose writings I have been studying for 3 years. He died 2 years before you were born. He won 62 duels and lost none. Not because he was the most gifted. He was not the most gifted. Several of the men he defeated were more talented. He looked at Riku. Because he never trained differently based on who was watching. He walked to the door of the dojo, stopped without turning around. "Come tomorrow at dawn, not for practice, for a different kind of lesson." Chapter 2. Fudoshin, the mind that cannot be moved. The immovable mind. Dawn. The dojo is empty, except for the two of them. The light outside, still gray. A single lamp on the low table between them. Hideo placed a scroll on the table. Not old, a copy he had made himself of passages he had studied for 3 years. His handwriting careful, deliberate, the handwriting of someone who copied slowly to absorb. "Miyamoto Musashi," he said. "You know the name. Everyone knows the name. Everyone knows the victories. Almost no one understands what produced them." He poured tea, set a cup in front of Riku. The steam rose in the cold morning air. People look at 62 duels and see a man with perfect technique. Musashi himself would have found this insulting. He wrote clearly that technique was not the source of his victories. Many of his opponents had better technique. He said this himself. He did not win because his sword was faster or his forms were more refined. Then what was it? Hideo tapped the scroll. Fudoshin, the immovable mind. He let the word sit for a moment. Outside, the first birds. The city beginning to wake. Not a mind without emotion, not a mind without fear. Musashi was not fearless. He wrote about fear as something that visited him the way weather visits. It arrives, it is real, you acknowledge it. And you continue. He looked at Riku directly. Fudoshin is a mind that is not moved by what it feels. That process is fear without becoming fear. That process is doubt without becoming doubt. That can hold both the emotion and the action at the same time, without the emotion interfering with the action. Riku thought about the match the evening before, the specific moment he had felt his opponent shift momentum. Not a technical moment, an internal one. Something in him had moved in response to something in Kota. A crack in his certainty that had then spread through his technique the way a crack spreads through ice. How did Musashi build it? He asked. Deliberately. And uncomfortably. Hideo stood and moved to the center of the practice floor. He sought out situations that revealed where his mind broke, not to demonstrate his skill, to find the exact locations of his weaknesses. He turned to face Riku. A student who trains only in favorable conditions builds a mind that functions only in favorable conditions. The dojo is a favorable condition. Controlled temperature, known opponents, familiar ground. Predictable timing. Your mind has been trained for the dojo, it functions there. But Musashi spent years outside the dojo. He moved through a simple form as he spoke, the movements fluid and without apparent effort. Cold, hunger, unfamiliar terrain. Opponents from traditions he had never encountered. He was not testing his technique in these conditions. He was testing the stability of his mind, finding where it flinched, and then returning to those exact places and working until the flinch became smaller, until it became a signal he noticed without following. He stopped. Your mind flinches when nothing is at stake. This is the specific crack in yours. You function under visible pressure because visible pressure creates the conditions your mind expects. You lose coherence when the pressure is invisible, when the only thing demanding anything from you is your own standard. Riku said nothing. There was nothing to argue with. This is not a character flaw, Hideo said. It is a training gap. Your technique has been trained. Your mind has not been trained in the same way. The technique is there. The foundation beneath the technique is unstable. He returned to the table. Saturday picked up his tea. Fudoshin is not something you possess naturally. It is built. One ordinary morning at a time. One session when nobody is watching at a time. One choice to do the full practice when nothing external is requiring it. He drank his tea. The building is slow and unglamorous, which is precisely why most people never do it. They want the immovable mind. They do not want the 10,000 ordinary mornings that produce it. He set his cup down. That is the practice. Nothing more dramatic than what I just described. Riku looked at the scroll on the table. Where do I start? Hideo almost smiled. Tomorrow morning, same time as today. The ordinary practice, the one where nothing is at stake. Do it as if everything is. Chapter 3. The Ordinary Morning. The next 4 months were not remarkable. Riku did not have a dramatic transformation. He did not find sudden motivation. He did not discover a technique that changed everything. He simply started practicing the same way on ordinary mornings that he practiced on mornings before matches. That was the entire change. It sounds small. It was not small. The resistance on ordinary mornings was different from the resistance before matches. Before a match, the stakes created their own energy. The practice almost ran itself. His mind was sharp because something external had sharpened it. On ordinary mornings, there was nothing external, only his own standard, only the decision to meet it or not. The first week, he met it 3 mornings out of 7. The other 4 he started well and let the session drift into something easier. He told Hideo this honestly. Hideo nodded. 3 out of 7 is 3 more than before. Continue. Week 2, 4 out of 7. Week 3, the same. Then, a week where he managed 6. Not through a burst of motivation, through a decision he made the night before and honored in the morning before the resistance had time to build its arguments. Something was happening that he couldn't fully see yet. Not in his technique. His technique was the same. In how his technique felt from the inside, more solid. Less dependent on external conditions to produce it. Hideo watched without commenting for 3 months. Then one morning he said, "Your practice looks different. My technique hasn't changed." "No, but the person executing it has. Slightly. The execution no longer looks like something you're doing. It is starting to look like something you are. You." This was the distinction Riku had not had language for before. Technique as something you do requires conditions to do it in. Motivation, stakes, an audience, a reason. Technique as something you are requires nothing external. It simply expresses itself because it has become inseparable from the person. This was what Musashi had been building for 50 years. Not a set of skills. An identity that expressed itself consistently regardless of conditions. Researchers who study expert performance have found something that maps directly onto what Riku was experiencing. The single greatest predictor of long-term consistency is not motivation level or discipline. It is the degree to which a behavior becomes part of how someone sees themselves. A person who exercises because they are someone who exercises doesn't need motivation to go. The behavior is an expression of identity rather than a means to an end. Musashi didn't train consistently because he was motivated. He trained because he was someone who trained. The distinction sounds small. Its effects are total. One evening, Hideo and Riku sat outside the dojo as the light faded. Hideo said something quietly, not quite to Riku, not quite to himself. Musashi spent his entire life seeking opponents, not to accumulate victories, to find the places in himself that still flinched. Every duel was information about where the mind still moved when it should have stayed still. He watched the last of the light. In times very different from this one, others will face what Riku faced, not in duels, in offices, in relationships. In the gap between who they intend to be and who they are on ordinary days, when nothing external is demanding anything. The crack is the same crack. The practice that closes it is the same practice. He looked at Riku. If you recognize this, walk this path. The work begins with the ordinary morning, the one where nothing is at stake. A single tap tells the algorithm, this matters. Chapter 4. Ikinen, the absolute intention. One thought, one intention, everything. 6 months into the changed practice, Hideo introduced something new. There is a concept Musashi applied to every duel he fought. He called it Ichinen. One thought, one intention. The complete investment of everything you have into this specific moment, without the part of your mind that is already managing the exit. Riku understood the concept immediately. He had been doing the opposite his entire training life. When a match was going well, The back of his mind was already managing victory, how it would look, what it would mean. When a match was going badly, the back of his mind was already managing the exit, the explanation, the next attempt. Part of his attention was always somewhere other than here. Musashi fought every duel as if it were his last, Hideo said. Not in the dramatic sense, in the functional sense. He brought everything he had into the specific moment. Nothing held back for the next exchange, nothing managed from a distance. He paused. This is why he arrived hours late to the duel with Sasaki Kojiro, the most feared swordsman in Japan. The crowd had been waiting for hours. Kojiro was furious, his composure already cracking before the duel began. Riku knew this story. Musashi arrived late deliberately. Musashi arrived when he was ready to bring everything, not before. The wait was the first move. By the time he stepped off the boat with an oar he had carved on the crossing, Kojiro's mind was already moving, already reacting, already somewhere other than present. He looked at Riku. The duel lasted seconds, not because Musashi's technique was superior, because Musashi's mind was completely present and Kojiro's was not. Ichinen is not intensity. It is the absence of divided attention. Modern research on what psychologists call flow state confirms what Musashi understood through decades of duels. Peak performance is not produced by trying harder. It is produced by the elimination of the monitoring process that runs alongside performance and interferes with it. The part of the mind that watches itself perform, evaluates the performance in real time, and manages the implications is the part that costs performance. When it goes quiet, what remains is everything the training built, operating without interference. Musashi called this mushin, no mind. Not the absence of thought, the absence of the observer watching the thought. Riku began practicing this deliberately. In formal matches, when he noticed the monitoring starting, the part that was already managing outcomes, he learned to return to the immediate physical reality of what was in front of him. The opponent's stance, his own breath, the ground under his feet. Just this. Only this. The matches didn't become easier, but they became more his. Chapter 5. The day Riku broke. 8 months into the changed practice, a visiting swordsman came to the province. He had traveled from the north, older by at least 15 years. The kind of fighter who had spent decades removing everything unnecessary from his technique until what remained was the absolute minimum required to win. No elegance, no performance, just effective, economical movement that offered an opponent nothing to read until it was too late. Hideo arranged a formal match. Riku prepared carefully. He had been doing well. The ordinary mornings had accumulated into something he could feel in how he moved. The consistency had built something. He believed this. He was not wrong that something had been built. He was wrong about how much. The match lasted less than 2 minutes. Not a close loss, a lesson. The visiting swordsman gave him nothing to work with and took everything he offered, and the whole thing was finished before Riku fully understood it had begun. He sat afterward on the edge of the practice floor with a specific kind of weight. Not the weight of defeat exactly, heavier than that. The weight of someone who had been building something for 8 months and watched it appear to mean nothing in the space of 2 minutes. The old thoughts arrived as if they had been waiting. Whether any of it was working, whether he was genuinely changing or merely going through the motions of change, whether the visiting swordsman would have beaten him 8 months ago by the same margin, in which case nothing he had done had mattered at all. He didn't attend practice the following morning. He told himself he was resting. He was not resting. He was avoiding the question of whether to continue. The second morning he slept late and did not go. The third morning Hideo came to find him. He did not knock loudly, just a quiet presence at the door that Riku recognized as his master's way of saying, "I know you're in there and I am not going away." Riku opened the door. Hideo looked at him without expression, not disappointment, not sympathy, just the steady gaze of a man who has watched this before and knows what it is. They sat. A long time passed before Riku spoke. "I lost to a man I should have beaten," he finally said. "How do you know you should have beaten him?" "Because I have been practicing harder than I ever have, for 8 months. Training harder is not the same as training more completely. and neither of them is a guarantee of a specific outcome against a specific opponent on a specific day. He paused. Did you practice well this morning? Riku said nothing. Did you practice at all? Nothing. Hideo sat with this for a moment. Do you know what Musashi did after the Battle of Sekigahara? He was 16 years old. He had fought on the losing side. The men around him were dying or being executed. The path he had been on was gone. He could have understood this as the end of his story. He looked at Riku. He understood it as information. Where had his mind moved during the battle when it should have stayed still? What had the chaos revealed about the places in him that still flinched? What needed more work? He shifted slightly. Shikata Ganai, do you know this phrase? It cannot be helped. More precisely accepting what cannot be changed, not as resignation, but as clarity. Resignation says the situation has defeated me. Clarity says the situation is what it is and now I deal with what comes next. He looked directly at Riku. You cannot change what happened in that match. You can change what you do tomorrow morning. Those are the only two things available to you right now. One of them is possible, the other is not. Riku sat with this. The man who beat me was better than me. On that day, in that exchange, with the preparation you both had on that specific morning, yes, that is a fact. It is not a verdict. A verdict closes a case. A fact is just information about where things stand right now. Hideo stood. Musashi lost political battles, lost friends, lost the security of a patron, lost opportunities that would not come again. He experienced all of it. What he did not lose in any of it was the direction, the practice, the path. He walked to the door. Come tomorrow morning. Riku came the next morning. Not because the loss had stopped mattering. It still mattered. Not because he had resolved the question of whether it was worth continuing. He hadn't. He came because Hideo had said to come, and because somewhere beneath the defeat and the doubt was the recognition that the only thing within his control was the tomorrow morning, not the loss. Not the visiting swordsman, not the 8 months. Just tomorrow morning. He chose to control the thing he could control. It was not a heroic decision. It felt like the smallest possible movement in the right direction. It was enough. Chapter 6. Hey-ho, strategy as a way of life. Not a tool for crisis. A permanent stance. A year after Riku had first sat with Hideo at dawn, the master introduced the final concept. Musashi called it hey-ho, strategy, but not in the way most people use the word. He opened his copy of the scroll to a different passage. Most people think of strategy as something you apply when things are difficult, a tool you pick up in crisis. But Musashi lived strategy, every day, every decision, every morning. Not as a response to difficulty, but as a permanent way of being. He looked at Riku. What is the difference between you now and you a year ago? Riku thought. I train the same way when nothing is at stake as when everything is. Yes, this is hey-ho, not a strategy for the duel, a strategy for the life, the posture you maintain in every small choice. Every morning nobody sees. Every session when the only thing requiring anything from you is your own word to yourself. He set the scroll down. Musashi stopped fighting duels at 29. He was undefeated. He could have continued. Instead, he painted, he sculpted, he wrote, he taught. And he brought the same quality to all of it, Riku said. The same quality of presence, the same ichinen, the same fudoshin, not as a warrior's practice applied to civilian activities. As the expression of a man who had become consistent at the level of identity, the principle transferred because it was never about swords. He paused. Musashi's paintings of birds and bamboo are considered masterworks, not because he was a naturally gifted painter, because he brought to painting the same complete presence he brought to the sword. Whatever he did with everything. Riku thought about his own practice over the past year. The mornings had changed, not because they had become easier. The resistance was still there most days, but his relationship to the resistance had changed. It was no longer an obstacle between him and practice. It was simply the weather on the way to the dojo, real, sometimes unpleasant, not relevant to whether he went. This was hey-ho, not a technique for overcoming resistance. A life organized such that resistance was never the deciding factor. Chapter 7. What Musashi wrote 7 days before he died. 1645. Mount Iwato, Japan. Miyamoto Musashi was 61 years old. He had been ill for months, a condition in his chest that the physicians could not name and could not remedy. He knew it would not leave. He had fought 62 opponents and lost to none of them. He could not fight this one. He withdrew to a cave on the mountain, not dramatically, the way a man who has always been practical makes a practical decision. He needed quiet. He needed time. He had things to write. Not a record of his victories. He had no interest in that. Not a technical manual for his sword style. His school would carry that forward without his help. He wrote 21 principles for how to live. He called